Let's bring in our political editor, Andrew Clennell. Andrew, happy Father's Day to you. Nice to see you.
And to you, Kieran.
Thank you, mate. And lots on today with Michaelia Cash coming up shortly.
Yes, that's right. Well, Australia is set for its biggest permanent migration intake since 1984 this year, after Prime Minister Anthony Albanese dropped at the Jobs Summit on Friday an increase in that permanent migration ceiling from 160,000 in a bid to address skills shortages. Since 1984, we've come close a couple of times, such as in 2013 to this number with 190,000, but this will be a record. The migrant intake will have the same percentage makeup as the old system in terms of a heavy concentration on skilled migration over family reunion, with 142,000 places for the skilled stream and 52,000 for the family stream. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese wants to send a message to the world that migrants are welcome here with this policy, and believes the summit confirmed that business groups want a switch from temporary to permanent migration. It's a far cry, Kieran, from before the pandemic, when people like Tony Abbott and Gladys Berejiklian were calling for a cut to Australia's immigration program to about 120,000 or less.
Yeah, indeed. We've come a fair way, haven't we, from that? And we've been talking about the cooperation at the summit, but already there seems like there's a bit of a stink between certainly the federal and New South Wales government.
That's right. We already have our first industrial relations stoush out of the Jobs Summit. The New South Wales government is angry that just as they threatened the rail union they were going to rip up their enterprise agreement in a bid to stop strikes that have dragged on for months, Industrial Relations Minister Tony Burke wrote to Fair Work Commission President Ian Ross saying the Commission should not terminate enterprise bargaining agreements on the request of employers. Only on Thursday, New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet told us he was prepared to rip up the current enterprise agreement and apply to the Fair Work Commission to stop the strikes, and he hoped the Commission would grant his wishes. You're not the first New South Wales government to cop trouble from the rail union. So what is it about this dispute that you can't fix it?
Well, because they won't agree to conditions in relation to the wage cap that's in place. We've made a number of concessions, and what I've said today is that the EA will be put to the union. They'll need to put that to their members, and they need to vote on it.
And what happens if that gets voted down?
Well, then if that gets voted down, then we will seek to terminate the current agreement in the Fair Work Commission.
And then what happens in terms of the dispute?
Well, we would seek to have this resolved independently through the Fair Work Commission, and we think that is a fair and reasonable approach.
How long could that drag on for?
Well, as long as there's no industrial action, then it doesn't matter if it takes time. And I think the union should. What the union.
And that's what would occur. There'd be an order for no industrial action.
Well, we would seek that.
Would you get it?
Well, that's a matter for the courts, Andrew.
So back to this Tony Burke letter. The New South Wales Industrial Relations Minister Damien Tudorhope described the letter yesterday to me as disgraceful interference. The letter to the Fair Work Commission from the IR Minister says that a commitment from the Jobs Summit was that the government would, quote, seek to legislate to ensure the process for enterprise agreement termination is fit for purpose and fair. It goes on, the government's reforms will be aimed at limiting the circumstances in which employers can apply unilaterally to the Commission for termination of an agreement, where termination would result in reducing employees' entitlements. But Burke claims this has nothing to do with the rail, tram and bus union. He claims he had said a while ago the government planned to change the law around this, and it was inspired by the fact tugboat operators were about to have their wages reduced.
Now, Andrew, one of the things out of the summit has been the need for greater flexibility on enterprise bargaining particularly, and it looks like the government's going to move fairly quickly on that.
Yeah, big changes ahead. The government announced out of the summit this week that it would be amending industrial relations laws to change the Better Off Overall test and introduce multi-employer bargaining. The legislation to make these IR changes will be introduced to the Parliament in October or November, I understand, as quickly as possible. One change we will see to the Better Off Overall test is an end to the current situation where 100% of employees can agree to an agreement, but the Fair Work Commission can come up with an imaginary worker and roster which would see one worker worse off and the agreement can be struck out. Workers will be able to trade away conditions in return for higher pay under these laws, is my understanding. Business groups are concerned that under the multi-employer bargaining arrangements, whole industries may go on strike. They want the laws to not allow workers to go on strike over a multi-employer bargaining agreement. My understanding is Tony Burke was unhappy when Innes Willix from the Australian Industry Group raised this concern outside the negotiations last week.
Now, Andrew, before we go to your interview with Michaelia Cash, the story you broke last week on 3 ministers in breach of the Ministerial Code of Conduct. Where is that at?
OK, well, we revealed this week that 3 ministers had been caught with shares after Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's Ministerial Code of Conduct banned ministers from having shares on July 7. Just an update. The Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and the Territories, Kristy McBain, who transferred 7 shareholdings to her husband, then had it pointed out to her that the code forbade ministers from transferring to a family member, says now her husband has sold 5 of the 7 interests last week. The other 2 interests in 2 startups are taking longer to offload, she says. The founder of OpenPolitics.com, Sean Johnson, pointed out to me as of late last week McBain's pecuniary interest register had only been amended to show the sale of 1 of the 7 shareholdings. Assistant Minister for Trade and Manufacturing, Tim Ayres, contacted me on Friday to say his shares are now sold. Government Services Minister Bill Shorten says he's still in the process of figuring out how to sell his credit union shares that he inherited from his mother.